Welcome to Containerized Conversations, where we try to containerize our conversation. I'm Jessica Caffarelli.
And I'm Josh Warhurst. Thanks for tuning in as we dive into some of our favorite topics, one containerized thought at a time.
Welcome to our book talk series, where we talk about a book after reading a chapter. This is the 7 Habits. We are on habit 3 in this podcast. If you haven't watched the other episodes, watch them. If you haven't read up to episode 3, pause it, read it, then listen again. And I like to start these episodes off just by quickly reviewing the habit. Did you want to do this one, Josh?
Sure. So you might disagree with this summary, but I'll go and try to do it. So habit 3 is putting first things first, and it's essentially about finding what to prioritize. It goes through individual roles that people have and how those roles can affect what you actually end up doing. It goes through the quadrants, which is the effectively like what work we do, if it's important or unimportant. Habit 3 is about organizing what you want to work on. It's about figuring out your roles and how those affect the work that you're going to do. And it's about planning the week ahead, I guess.
That was a really good overview. I definitely think if I was going to prioritize what's the best in this chapter and what isn't, I definitely think the management matrix that you kind of mentioned is probably the most important tool to pick out from this chapter.
Management matrix. So I guess we can talk about this management matrix because it starts this off. So the author talks about how sort of the history of time management, where it started with like Post-it notes and like just organizing the things you need to do. And then it moved towards like prioritization, like actually choosing the things that are most important to do. And then it moves on to what he calls like the 4th generation, which is figuring out what is important to prioritize long term.
Yeah.
So he uses this concept of the management matrix, which is basically 4 squares, and it's divided left to right. It's urgent and not urgent. And then from top to bottom, it's important and not important. So in the top left square, it's the important activities that are urgent. And in the bottom right square, it's the not important activities that are not urgent, right? If that makes sense.
Yep.
I think the big thing that's counterintuitive and probably the most interesting thing about this is the square 2 being the most important thing to focus on, which is the stuff that's important but not urgent. That's his big takeaway from this whole chapter in some ways. And I remember you bringing this up at work before as like, where should we focus on as a team? Because it's really easy to focus on the urgent and important things, but we need to be also focusing on the not urgent important things as the biggest things to fix.
Yeah, well, I've had the fantastic opportunity of working at multiple different jobs. And every job that I've walked into, I don't think I've walked into one and I've looked at the team and went, oh yeah, they are definitely doing a great job of managing quadrant 2 work over everything else. Right. I feel like that is every time, especially for like a DevOps team, an SRE team, some sort of like team that has to deal with some sort of touches some sort of operation part of a job. More times than not, every time I walk in, I see them working on only urgent issues, 100% urgent issues, to the point where they've convinced themselves that if you aren't working on urgent issues, you shouldn't be working, right? And I'm sure there's some listeners at home this will kind of hit a little too hard for them. It used to hit very hard for me. If someone tells you that working on something that is not urgent, I need you to work on something that's not urgent, you'd probably be like, whoa, what? No, I have all of these urgent things that are burning. I don't have time for that. What are you talking about? It's a really hard concept to understand that there is not urgent work that is important, right? It's such a hard concept, but it's true. And that stuff is the stuff that shrinks the work that's in 1 and 3, right? It shrinks the urgent work for you if you work on that not urgent but important stuff. And the less you ignore it, the more urgent things happen, right? More things burn down. You have a DevOps support Slack channel, and in that Slack channel, someone posts something like, hey, the build doesn't seem to be working, right? Like
Right.
it might be urgent, I mean, or important, but also it might not be.
And sometimes you jump into those activities because you're trying to assess if it's important or,
Yeah.
important or not. And
Yeah.
because you're halfway there, you're like, oh, I'll just still finish it, even though it's
Yeah.
actually not important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then, to follow up on this quadrant thing, what I really like about the book we're reading, so, for our audience of members at home, we're reading the updated version that has insight from his child in this.
Yep.
And in the section towards the end, he has you take a little quiz, just to see how much of I call them adrenaline junkies, but I think he called it urgency addiction. But how much of a person, how much do you crave that urgency? How much do you need that urgency? And so he has like a little quiz in the back, and I thought that was hilarious to take it. I actually got strong urgency mindset, so I'm not even a low urgency mindset guy. I think he put it, I'm coming close to an addiction, or more so, I'm actually recovering from an addiction. Honestly,
I was definitely in the low urgency mindset.
yeah,
There were a
I figured
couple
that.
ones that hit high, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like I seem to do my best work when I'm under pressure. I think that's probably true, but a lot of the other ones, like I feel guilty when I take time off work. Nope.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
The adrenaline rush from a new crisis seems more satisfying to me than the steady accomplishment of long-term results.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, that one was a mid one for me,
yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting. I do like the quiz, and I think if you have the latest version, I would go and take it because I think it's kind of fun, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah,
Maybe we'll have a bonus episode where we just talk about the urgency matrix and these questions because this is pretty fun.
Yeah, what's funny is I didn't hit 4 on any of them, but I definitely was hovering around 2 and 3 on most of them. When I joined into the platform engineering team, that was one of the biggest issues you guys were having, was that you were always working in the urgent quadrants and you were never working on quadrant 2. And so with the help of someone else that was with us, we were able to turn you guys into quadrant 2 workers. And it's hard, right? Because the first thing you have to do is you have to figure out, because he does mention in here, you have to say no to quadrant 3 work. You might not be able to say, you can't say no to quadrant 1 work. And so you have to juggle working on quadrant 1 work and trying to get enough time to work in quadrant 2 to shrink quadrant 1. But I read that paragraph, and for me, I was like, that's hard, right? Because when you first walk into a group, you can't even distinguish the difference between 1 and 3, right? It is so hard to figure out what is urgent but not important, because this sense of urgency portrays importance, right? When you have someone come in a Slack channel and say, hey, this thing is broken and I'm blocked, I can't work on this. Like, that sounds super important.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, like, we did do some work that was important and not urgent. Like, I'm big on like relationship building, trying to understand other teams. Your point is really good about taking the urgent stuff and finding what's important and what's not important. And he actually has a statement later on, which I think is really good, which is basically you got to say no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And saying no is something I should maybe do more often. It's something that I struggle with because it's very satisfying to help out other people
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
And even when that work is not important, right? Because I feel like I'm still building a relationship with somebody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
These aren't like requests from the void where I'm like, I'm going to see this person face to face later today. It feels kind of like it's in that quadrant 2, or even quadrant run 1, where I'm like building a relationship and solving somebody's immediate problem, but then realizing that it's actually not important is something that takes time. And then also understanding that sort of prevention activities,
Yeah.
right? I think sometimes you get so focused on the urgent stuff, your mind's not even willing to accept that there's a way to get out of it,
Yeah.
right?
There's no, what are you talking about? We have to just do this stuff. We do it every day. We do it all the time. What do you mean automate? Get out of here.
Yeah, it's like we're spending like 8 hours a day solving tasks, right?
Yeah.
10 hours a day solving
Yeah.
tasks. and you want us to spend some of that time doing something else that
Yeah.
isn't solving tasks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
you
hard.
bring up something really interesting that you said there, and I actually think is like a good thing that I almost think we should debate about, because you mentioned, you guys were doing some quadrant 2 activities like building relationships. But I argue those quadrant 2 activities weren't shrinking quadrant 1 work. But and this is my caveat. So like what I do, like when I do first join a company and join a team, is I focus 100% on quadrant 2 work that shrinks quadrant 1.
Mhm.
The only activities I focus on is quadrant 2 work that shrinks it. And so I don't do any sort of relationship building unless it's very specifically the team I'm reporting into, and I know by building those relationships it's going to help shrink quadrant 1 because I can get them to help me work on those quadrant 2 work stuff. But otherwise I don't focus on any sort of relationship building. And it has bit me in the butt before, right? And so I can't say that that's a good approach, because then it outcasts me, from like the rest of the organization, because I didn't get a chance to build those relationships that is really important to do,
Let me give you a story that I think is actually where I get it wrong, right?
Mm, yeah,
So, okay, Slack happens. On Slack, somebody from SQA says, "Hey, the build isn't, I can't deploy the build. I can't deploy this image to some server." There is a way that this can be a quadrant 3 activity, which is that it's not actually important that they get the build right away. They
yeah,
actually have other tests they're running.
yeah,
They don't even tell you. They're just
yeah.
saying, like, actually in the next like 48 hours I need this build to work. But we can
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
do this other stuff right now. We're not blocked,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
The way that they phrase it is that it's important because they want it done, but it's not important from like an urgency. It's not actually that urgent,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, you can go and solve this thing by going into figuring out why it's broken,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And solving it yourself. And you're not shrinking any work because, to your point, you're just spending your time to solve a problem that's not actually immediately important.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you can go and say, well, this problem isn't actually important, but the relationship building thing is not just me solving a problem for them and saying, hey, look at me, I'm helping you.
Yeah.
It's me going to that developer and saying, here's what I'm doing right now. And if you have time, let's sit down and go through what I'm doing so
Yeah.
that you can, at the very least in the future, not feel blind. You can
Yeah.
actually go and tell me where in the process it's broken. If you right now look at the pipeline and you say it's actually broken on this one step and all they have to do is rerun the step, that's one way closer to helping themselves. And that actually becomes something that prevents future incidents,
I like that.
right?
Yeah.
So there is a way to transform this work from quadrant 3 work into quadrant 2 work
Yeah.
if you recognize that the relationship building isn't just making somebody's happy, it's the teaching them to fish instead of giving
Yeah.
them a fish. So
Yeah.
giving them the fish is the arguably urgent, or but
Yeah,
it's
well, that's a really great example, Josh. You're taking a P problem and turning it into a production. What does PC stand for? I actually forgot.
so it's I think it's production capacity,
Yeah,
right?
you're turning it into a production capacity resolution. I mean, that's perfect. Because the other thing I was going to say was you also provided another really great tip for people to figure out. Like, you're right. When I look at a Slack message that's in like a support channel about someone saying that this build is failing, I'm instantly taking it as it's urgent, right? But to your point, they could have just been dropping a quick message and then working on 20 other things. And like they're just kind of hoping you get to it in the next day or two.
Yeah.
And so just the simple follow-up question before you even break your line of thought and context switch, just ask, is this important? When do you need this solved by? And maybe that right there, that one simple change could really help people in figuring out what things that might be quadrant 1 work, but is actually quadrant 3 work that can be moved and put
Hmm.
into quadrant 2 in the future. I like that. I like it.
I think we could talk about the quadrant thing for a while. I think it's solid and it's actually probably the most important part of this chapter, but I think we should talk about some of the other things just real quick.
Hmm.
So he talks about roles. One thing I just want to mention. So this computer metaphor, I get so bothered by this computer metaphor. But on page
It
190
bothers
of
you
our
every time.
every single time. um he says, returning once more to the computer metaphor, if habit 1 says you're the programmer, and habit 2 says write the program, then habit 3 says run the program, live the program. I don't know. I feel like being proactive is saying you're the programmer. True, right? You
Yeah.
can actually change this program. But habit 2, I feel like, is more like design the program in a thoughtful way. Like actually understand what the program should be doing.
Mm.
Then habit 3 is actually writing the program to achieve something. Now, mind you, I'm just being a little bit pedantic here. I just think that there's a lot of times where, yeah, you can write a program and run it, but
Yeah.
the more important thing is making sure that the program is actually doing what you want to do,
Yeah.
which is why I have a problem with this silly computer metaphor. But
Well,
whatever.
I
It was
mean,
the 80s.
that's the thing we keep disagreeing on is I still think habit 2 is about just chopping through the forest. Don't think about what direction you're heading in. And habit 2 is about getting you to start chopping that forest down, right? Without even caring or worrying about what direction it's in. So same idea with the programming thing. The first habit is, you are a programmer, you can program. Habit 2 says just start programming. And then habit 3 is like, okay, what are you actually programming? Should you be programming that, or should you be focusing on this actually section more? Right? At least that's my argument.
I
If
mean,
I wrote this
maybe.
book, that would be my programming analogy.
I think habit 2 is all about beginning with the end in mind, right?
Yeah.
The mission statement, right? The
Yeah.
idea of like this is what we're working towards. To me, that's a design doc, right?
Uh,
That's something that you reference later, and when people open their merge requests or pull requests, they say, "Is this actually something in the design doc?" Right?
yeah. Yeah.
Is this
Yeah.
actually fulfilling a requirement? I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
We can move
Yeah.
on, but
Yeah. Yeah, so you were mentioning roles, but like, I'm flipping through the chapters here and I am getting to the section in the book that he talks about delegation.
hmm.
And I don't know if this was what
Just
you were
before
referring to.
I think delegation is good. But just before that, he has a statement on 191 that I think is really important, which was also a bit of an eye-opening thing for me, right? An
Yeah.
eye-opening quote, which was that you can be efficient with things, but effective with people, right? You can't be
Mm,
efficient with people,
yeah.
right? There are things that can take a lot of time. You think it should take a little bit of time, but if you're actually want it solved, you can't just expect it's going to take like 20 minutes, right?
The
It
amount
might
of
take 4
times
hours.
the amount of times I've tried to be efficient with people and like, let's just hop on a quick call. Let me dump this on you. You can figure it out. Like, let's just do this really quickly. And the amount of times that they get so frustrated with me because of it. So yes, it is 100% true. You've been
Yeah.
in those situations for sure.
That's why it's called like the 7 habits of highly effective people, because a lot of this stuff is interpersonal. It's not the 7 habits of highly efficient people,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
which is just getting stuff done quickly, right? Or in the least amount of time. It's actually being effective, and so many of these habits are interpersonal, right? They're how we relate to ourselves and they're how we relate to other people, and none of that can actually we can be efficient with certain things, but with people we can just be effective. We can't be efficient. So that's
Yeah.
a really interesting take.
Well, and to take that even deeper, that actually means that efficiency is the enemy of effectiveness. Think about that. That is in more times than not, being efficient means you are less effective. And it's counterintuitive to what you would think that means, right? Because you're always trying to make things more efficient. And you would think slowing things down would completely destroy any effectiveness of, maybe releasing. Think DevOps is about going fast, making processes efficient, but it's suggesting that the effectiveness of that is actually less so, at least in some situations. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I need to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. That bothers me. It rubs me the wrong way, but it's hard for me, like, it's hard for me to think of a situation where it wouldn't be true because, like, sure, you can make things efficient. Let's say the pipelines are running efficiently, but what if they're failing all the time? That's not very effective. What if no one knows how they work besides you? So when it does break, only you can solve it.
But he does say that, like, you can be efficient with things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can make it so that the pipelines take 5 minutes instead of
Yeah. Yeah.
15 minutes,
Yeah.
right? That's not like a totally unreasonable thing. But to your point, when you start applying that to people, right? And you say, you know what? My meetings are going to be a max of 5 minutes, right? I'm not going to do any meetings that are more than 5 minutes because it's just not efficient, right? And then you find that actually, you know, 5 minute meetings aren't effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not able to actually dig into an idea deep enough in that amount of time, even though you finished a meeting with all the stakeholders. You're not actually achieving what you want to out of that. And it's because you're dealing with people, and people are, you know, complicated and weird, and everybody's
Yeah.
different, right?
Yeah. Well, another example that I actually have argued with someone I continually end up working with in my career path. I always end up working with them again. And me and him, we always get into an argument. He gets really angry at me when I make things super efficient, right? When I automate things and I simplify things. I have a really good knack of taking really complex, convoluted processes and technology and making it simpler for people to use. But he gets really frustrated more times than not when I do that. And he argues with me and says that I'm taking away their learning opportunities, right? By abstracting them away from it. They no longer get the ability to learn. And we had that argument all the time as platform engineers, right? Like we always talked, what of us abstracting this away is making it so that our development teams aren't even learning Ansible. They're not even learning automation. They're just using our platform to automate. But the second something goes wrong, they don't know how to troubleshoot it, which actually goes into kind of the next part of the book, or the chapter that I thought was interesting, which is like the gopher delegation and the stewardship delegation. Now, what I like about this is because I can extrapolate this into a working environment. And more times than not, I've seen a lot of situations where there'll be teams saying like, oh, I think this team should be doing this stuff, right? And they'll push that work off onto that team. But then they'll get really upset when that team doesn't pick up on that work. And again, walking into organizations, a lot of times what I find is what's going on is when that team is trying to push that responsibility off onto that other team, they don't enable the team to even do those responsibilities in any way, shape, or form, right? Like a perfect example, like the classic one is, a DevOps person's trying to get the dev team to support a production issue, right? Let's say like they want them to be full stack and they want them to take on issues. But what I find is more times than not, the dev teams don't have proper access to production, right? And so there's this expectation that the development team should be troubleshooting this stuff. But then when you dig into it, they don't have access to this. They don't have access to that, right? They don't have AWS access. And then you like start asking, okay, like how are they supposed to troubleshoot this? And they go, well, our logs go to, New Relic or Datadog or, some Splunk place. And so they can look at the logs there. It's not our fault if they don't log properly, like get them to log properly, right? And sure, valid. They should be logging properly, but they're not right now. And maybe they also don't focus on quadrant 3 work, which is possibly what you guys are also doing.
Quadrant 2 work.
No, quadrant 3. Oh yeah, quadrant. I always get mixed up. Yeah. So maybe it's because you haven't enabled them to do it right. And so that's what I really like about this story. He doesn't really talk about enabling, but he does that with his son, right? He gives his son the tools to cut the lawn. He shows his son how to cut the lawn. And he tells him like, hey, why don't you show me how this goes? And so he like builds the confidence and pride in his son to want to cut the lawn. And so it's the same idea as applying it to, a dev team, trying to get them to to troubleshoot the production issue, you should figure out how to get them to want to troubleshoot the production issue and make it so it's easier for them to do so,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, so he talks about, you mentioned he had a gopher delegation and a stewardship delegation, right? The gopher delegation is essentially tell somebody to do something,
Yeah.
right? So that's when you go and tell your son, if you will, to go and mow the lawn, right?
Yeah.
And the mowing doesn't get done until you tell them.
Yeah.
And often you will get bosses that are like, oh, you go do this, you go do that, you go do that. That's kind of a classic, like, go for delegation. A lot of this, though, is not necessarily in the task asking them to do something. It's in how you enable them to do it, right? Trusting
Yeah.
them to do the task, right? So ideally in the future, you never have to ask them to go do the lawn, right?
Yeah.
Mow the
Yeah.
lawn, right? You never have to ask them to understand their pipeline, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever metaphor you want to use. The stewardship delegation is all about having somebody take over a task effectively so that you don't have to do it in the future, but truly own the task, right? Where they feel responsible for the outcome of the task. And that does often require some level of, the stewardship is not just, I'm going to give you a task, own it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's actually, I'm going to help you ease into this task. I'm going to
Yeah.
give you everything you need to succeed in this task,
Yeah.
and I will help you along. And in the future, you won't need my help, right? That's kind of the future of the stewardship delegation. I think it is very DevOpsy in my mind, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We often try to say, let's teach the devs how to ops, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that is the thing that they often lack, right? And you can teach ops how to dev, right? I think it's less likely, or it's less common, just because there tends to be a lot more devs than ops. But
Hmm.
the fact is, a lot of this is actually sitting down with them and seeing that they understand the problem and helping them when they need the help, and ultimately they won't have to come back to you if you've done your job right.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. No, 100%. And like I think that's the thing. It's like sometimes I do think, like, what's the point of having this delegation part in this chapter, right? Like, putting first things first makes sense on why, like, the quadrants are in there and explaining the quadrants. But at first it's like, why is delegation in, right? And we just had a whole conversation about, you know, why do you delegate? Why not just do the work? And maybe the question is because what is quadrant 3 work to you is actually quadrant 1 work to them. Maybe that's the answer to your question. Maybe if to one team it's quadrant 3 work and to another team it's quadrant 1 work, then by delegating that work to them, you enable this PPC opportunity and allow them to work on quadrant 2 work that then lowers their quadrant 1 work.
Yeah, I think, gosh, there's a lot.
There's a lot to unpack.
I think part of it is that delegation is a quadrant 2 activity, and a lot of people don't do it right, right? And figuring out, it's not urgent, but it's really important that you get other people to understand the work that needs to be done. I think stewardship, he actually says that one of the things that makes it effective, or the one things you need for it to be effective, is for it to be clear about the expectations of this relationship, right?
Yep.
And so he mentions desired results, right? Guidelines. So what are the things that, the activity, what are the parameters within it what are the parameters within which the individual should operate, resources, so like what resources they have available, accountability and consequences, and being very clear with all these things, because if you aren't very clear, then sometimes people get lost in the weeds and they don't realize that they can come to you, and they don't realize that they might be punished for not having this pipeline out that you asked them to do.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I think a lot of this is figuring out that clarity, though, because a lot of times you can go to somebody and say, "Hey, go do this work. It's really important it gets done by the end of the week." And sure, you've laid out the fact that it's important. You've laid out that you want it done, but like, what exactly do you want done? And um, have you mentioned how other people can help out with this, or this is where
Yeah.
you should be looking at, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's delegating work is a really important skill and something that we should all be better at.
Yeah, I go back and forth. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't belong in this chapter. Maybe it should be a like a part 3.1 or part 2.9,
I know
a private victory chapter or something. I don't know.
he struggled a lot with like whether or not some of these activities, especially once they start involving other people, if they're in like the habits 4, 5, and 6, right?
Yeah,
Which we haven't gotten to yet. But and I haven't read those yet. But the habits of interdependence, right?
yeah,
And he's saying that actually these are skills that you need to focus on your part of it
yeah,
to make it work out. And
yeah,
that's why he's putting it in like the personal development. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think none of this is perfect. And part of what makes it interesting to read is that it's not perfect.
yep. And that was our containerized conversation. I'm Jesse Caffarelli.
I'm Josh Warhurst. Have a great night.